الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. Brothers and sisters in Islam, in response to last week's khutbah, many of you have asked, what then are the solutions to the challenges we face? The solutions are two, one long-term and one short-term. A long-term strategy requires that we set aside funds, we find qualified people who have the skills, both in Islam as well as in Western modern secular culture, to address the toxicity that we face, not just in America, but in the world at large. This is an existential problem that human beings face. It surfaces in so many different ways. We are unable to relate to so much that is happening in society. Our sexual preferences have just broadened so much that even our alphabet soup is running out of letters, right? You start with L, and then you move to G, and then you go to B, and who knows where those preferences will end. This is all part of a particular culture, a particular way of looking at the world, and we don't have answers to that immediately. But you and I have lives to lead. We have children to raise. And so we have an obligation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be asking us, well, what exactly have you done to address this particular issue? So I think the request is fair, and the immediate response is a band-aid response. It's like you're in the trauma unit and you have to be fixed before you die because of a loss of blood. And there are three responses to this. I'll deal with one today and the other two perhaps in the weeks ahead. The first is to nurture a culture of spirituality, a deep sense of the spiritual, of the divine, of the other world. We have to nurture that in ourselves and amongst our children. And the objective here is to connect that child and to connect ourselves with the community, with the global Islamic community, and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In a sense, this is very basic to Islam. Even those who are otherwise given to ignore or to be indifferent to Islamic practices will concede that your ibadat are the basis of Islam. Praying 5 times a day is basic to Islam. Fasting in the month of Ramadan is basic to Islam. Hajj is basic to Islam, and so on. So what I'm providing for you today is no different from that which was given previously. The difference being that I'm not looking at it as an obligation that you owe to Allah, which certainly you and I do, but as that band-aid that you and I require to tide us over these very trying times. And we rarely look at spirituality in that way. Our spirituality is highly contested. You walk into a masjid and somebody will tell you, brother, you can't do it that way. This is contra sunnah. Another word for contra sunnah is bid'ah. So what happens to spirituality, it becomes a tug of war. It's my spirituality against your spirituality. The objective gets lost. Sometimes you require something that is a stopgap measure. And Islamic history is replete with stopgap measures where communities who were unable to enjoy the education or the society wherein Orthodox Islam, as taught to us by the Quran and the Sunnah, was unavailable. So instead of putting up their hands in despair, they developed stopgap measures. It brings to mind Dr. Ma, may Allah rest his soul in the highest places in Jannah. He was a vascular surgeon who had the rare opportunity to go to the Soviet Union, and because of his credentials, he was given certain latitude that others were denied. So he got to go to remote parts of the Soviet Union, teaching others how to practice medicine as he did. And he got to the small little village and was operating in the hospital, and lo and behold, there was a young lady there who happened to be Muslim, and she was thrilled that she's now meeting an educated Muslim that others were looking up to. She invited him home. And so he went home. He was just thrilled that he's getting an opportunity to meet a fellow Muslim in such a remote part of the Soviet Union. And then on the way home, they spoke about their devotion to Islam. And then she revealed her effort and her mother's effort to create this culture of spirituality, to nurture spirituality amongst them. Remember, this is the Soviet Union, where the teaching and the practice of religion, and particularly Islam, was denied. So she gets home, she says, Alhamdulillah, we have been consistent in our practice of Islam, my mother and I. So he got home and he said, I'd love to participate in that. She says, we do it twice a day. And then he saw what they did. After the sun set, they would take out a book and they would sit down and face each other, and then they would put the book on their head. Mother would start and then give that to the daughter. And they would do that 7 times, probably, that's the magic number. And that would be the end of their spirituality. The book that they thought was the Quran was actually a book full of adhkar. That was the only connection they had to Islam. The only connection they had to Islam. And only a fool who's filled with the wrong kind of orthodoxy would trample upon that spirituality. Says, no sister, this is not how you pray. No sister, this is not the Quran. If you cannot provide a solution that is better and long-lasting, let them be. So he left her entirely in her ignorance. Gave her these, at that time there were no phone numbers, an address, and it says, please be in contact with me, I will send you some literature, which he did. But the point I'm making is the culture of spirituality is something that human beings pine for. And if it is not ready-made, if they don't have an imam or a sheikh, they don't have a schooling system that can nurture that, then they'll find something. Our kids find it in music. Our kids find it in music. They find it in art. Those who have not been blasted by the mortal sin that all human beings suffer. In the words of Junaid Baghdadi, there is no greater sin than ghafla. Heedlessness. A human being caught in one of those experimental wheels. You keep moving with no end in sight. With no end in sight. With no objective. But we have to start at home. And I share the story with you because I know there are amongst us those who live in their own little Soviet unions, who are equally cut off because of parental mismanagement perhaps, because of their own disregard for their future. But now that we have kids, we are concerned. And we are hoping we can have that sit down and talk to them about spirituality and the need to belong. Unfortunately, you cannot inculcate and nurture spirituality in that way. It is an organic process. It takes every minute of every day. It has to grow on you. You have to attain the tonality of spirituality. You have to allow yourself to be imbued with it. And that is a slow process. It is why you're required to fast, to pray 5 times a day, every day for the rest of your life. In addition to it being an obligation to Allah, it is also your way and my way of acquiring and nurturing a spirituality that is absolutely essential for the world in which we find ourselves. Absolutely essential. It's the shield around us. It's there to protect you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises us that if you are steadfast in your prayer, in your fasting, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect you by way of these practices. So the first solution, or band-aid solution, if you want to call it that, is to go back to the spirituality, to the practices that you may have picked up along the way. Some of it is orthodox, some of it not. Ideally, you should follow that which is orthodox, but there are multiple interpretations of what is and what isn't, and I'm not here to stand and tell you that you can do this and you cannot do that. So if a Thursday night dhikr works for you, by all means. By all means. And absolutely, the kids should be in tow. The ultimate objective is to introduce that child to a world that child would find comfortable, beautiful, that child would find peace and tranquility in. You can't do that if you impose on that child. You cannot do that if that child is forced into praying and fasting and so on. This is where we have to draw the line. This is where we have to use our suggestive powers to slowly bring that child into an orbit of spirituality. One that child will miss dearly once he or she is gone to college, perhaps, away from home. You would want such a child to seek out the first mosque in that town that child will be calling home for the duration of his or her college. You would want him to find the local MSA. You would want her to be part of some halaqah. You would want her to be part of some dhikr session. These are the tools that we can use as individuals. We don't have solutions to the challenges that the world poses. So the alternative is to insulate ourselves to the extent possible. To insulate ourselves to the extent possible from the world out there. Tonight, inshallah, we'll talk about Surah Kahf. And you have wonderful examples in the Quran of people who have tried to do exactly that. They tried to do exactly that, to create a protective shield around themselves, lest they be seduced. And if you've been reading the Surah Kahf and you understand it, you know exactly what I'm referring to. Isolating themselves from society, lest they be seduced by the allure, by the razzmatazz, by the grand attractions of their culture and their society. This is the Quran speaking to us. Not too interested in the details, and it goes into, it makes a point of says, stop speculating. How many were there? How long did they tarry for? 300 years? Were they 5? Were they 7? Irrelevant. What is relevant is the fact that these young men, and we like to connect spirituality with age, right? But these were young people. The Quran celebrates young people. Last week I gave you the example of a young man who was disobedient. We didn't talk about Maryam, who was supremely obedient. Supremely obedient. We didn't talk about the sleepers of the cave, who was supremely obedient. We didn't talk about Yusuf, who was supremely obedient. We didn't talk about Ismail, who was supremely obedient. يا أبت افعل ما تؤمر ستجدني إن شاء الله من الصابرين. We didn't talk about that. So yes, we celebrate the youth and their connection to spirituality. Different times, different epochs. And objective clearly was to instill in us a value for that. We look at Salah and Sawm and we think about it as mere obligations. We should stop doing that. We should understand that these are tools. This is like a fireman's uniform. It's needed to shield off the heat. These are tools. If we look at it differently, inshallah, our approach would be different. If we look at it as an encumbrance, as an obligation, as a duty whose time has passed, then we lose the value in it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not simply impose obligations upon us because He wants to. But He does so لِيُزَكِّيكُمْ, so that He could purify you. يُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا, so that He could cleanse you and prepare you for this journey. After all, He did put us on this earth, and He knows best how we should equip ourselves for this journey. So my message to you is that you re-look at your obligations, look at them as indispensable tools that Allah has given us in order to deal with the challenges we face. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا كما أمر، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله مرغما لمن جحد به وكفر، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله سيد الخلائق والبشر. عباد الله، اتقوا الله تعالى من سماع اللغو وفضول الخبر، وانتهوا عما نهاكم عنه وزجر، واعلموا أن الله أمركم بأمر بدأ فيه بنفسه، وقال إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد، وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد، خصوصا منهم ذي الأصل العريق أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي وعلى بقية الصحابة والقرابة أجمعين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. عباد الله، اتقوا الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر، ولذكر الله أكبر، والله أعلم، يعلم ما تصنعون. أقم الصلاة.